All right, guys, I think it's been about a week that I've been working on this stuff and giving you some tips to help you understand how to practice at home during this coronavirus outbreak. And one of the things that I want to share with you today is going to be a game changer for you. And it's something so simple, but it's something I've been spending an inordinate amount of time on, probably compared to what you typically think about. When I'm practicing, I'm working on my setup and the little nuanced details. I'm going to tie together three huge things that I keep seeing happening in the Facebook group where people are posting their videos and we're helping them out, mastering the dead drill. But there's something I keep seeing over and over again, and there's actually a really simple fix to it. And as I've been working through getting all the fine details of my own setup right while I'm practicing in front of the mirror and looking at it on video, the stuff that I'm going to share with you today is something that's going to be something you probably never ever heard before, but it's going to make a huge difference in just making the tiniest, most subtle changes. So first of all, one of the things I'm seeing a lot in the Facebook group and in our online lessons of swing reviews is a lot of knee flex at address. Now this knee flex does all kinds of stuff, first in a negative way. When you have too much knee flex, as I've talked about on the video on the site, there's literally a video called How Knee Flex Determines Swing Plane. And as you stand more up, flex your knees more, your upper body will tend to stand more upright unless you bend from the waist, which obviously, as I talked about in the last video, leads to a lot of other issues where your hips are over rotating and you lose power and you're changing your swing plane and you're gonna hurt your back because you're losing mobility. So, when you add all this knee flex, it tends to flatten somebody's swing plane because their spine angle becomes more upright. And as you've heard me say, spine angle is one of the primary determinants of swing plane. So now you're going to be forced, I call this the puppy dog humping the fire hydrant. Sorry for the crude word, but that's what I typically tell my students when you set up like this. And then you have to swing all arms. It's very important that you have relatively minimal knee flex. Now, obviously not locked out, you have to have some knee flex in there. But I'm going to show you a really simple trick today that is something that is really, really subtle. We're talking literally a couple degrees of movement that will completely change your setup and change. You're going to see like this massive compounding effect and how one little change will change every single little thing in your swing and things that you're struggling with, from letting your hips over rotate, your hips sway, not having power in your swing. One little setup change that I'm going to share with you right now can change all of that. So at setup, when people have too much knee flex, a lot of times there's a lot of other little things that are out of whack. So you've seen the video on the site where I talk about the right knee laser beam drill, and there's a lot of people let their knees over rotate and roll to the outside of their foot and then have no power coming down. But that should be a natural occurrence of setup. You shouldn't have to set up and then try and point your knee at the ball in an unnatural way. It's going to create weird, unhealthy tension on the outside of your leg, and it's going to be impossible to maintain that throughout the backswing because you're not going to be able to coil up. So the trick is to have that Tour Pro setup that performs as well as it looks. All you have to do is one tiny little thing, and let me show you what that is. So at setup, if I set up just like perfectly square with my hips, which you totally can, but a lot of people, again, when they set up perfectly square, they start adding knee flex. Now, a simple trick to get rid of that excess knee flex is to rotate your hips even just a couple degrees. Now watch what happens. So right now my knees are basically in line on the inside of my feet because my feet are a little bit wider than my pelvis, and obviously my legs are at an angle. Now watch what happens if I rotate my hips just a little bit. Do you see how I now look like I have that canted in right knee, but I don't feel like I'm twisting my right knee and feeling all this weirdness in my hip? I'm just rotating my hip slightly. You see how that straightens up my left leg? So I look like I have, you've heard the old school reverse K idea set up. This is how you get it naturally without trying to manipulate yourself into some weird alphabet-shaped golf setup. The golf setup is supposed to be athletic. And so as you add just a tiny bit of hip rotation, look what this does to my leg. It straightens it up, cants my knee in. Now watch what happens to the knee flex. I can set up with a lot of knee flex, then set up incorrectly, and then just rotate my hips. It instantly straightens up. So now I have too much knee flex, rotate my hips a little bit. Now my leg is straightened. That was maybe still a little bit too much knee flex, but if I do this from a proper setup, this leg is nice and straight and this leg is angled in, which gives me that brace, that support during the backswing. Obviously, if your knees are out like this, as I mentioned earlier, you're gonna be swaying all over the place. So first of all, go back and look at the setup video. I'll put a link down in the description in case you haven't seen it. But go through the paying attention to how I'm talking about hip hinge and axis tilt and weight distribution, why you should be on the balls of your feet, all that stuff. But then add this tiny little cant Just a small, I mean, it's not even going to be really visible from down the line on camera, but you can see by just doing this little tiny rotation how it straightens up my leg, brings the knee in for this support brace that I'm gonna load into in the backswing. Now, so that's just what it does for the lower body, because just by doing this, by taking this little couple degrees of rotation, if you're one of these people who has a tendency to let their hips overturn in the backswing and lose all that coil up and power in your lower body, now you're gonna have just that couple degree head start. So it's gonna be a lot easier for you to have a powerful base in the backswing versus when you start kind of weak and sloppy with a lot of knee flex, your hips are gonna bend and move all over the place. And I see this a lot, especially in older golfers who get kind of lazy with bad posture, bending from the waist, lots of knee flex, and then their hips just do this all over the swing and it just produces zero power. So that's the benefit of just, you're gonna have a little bit less hip rotation in the backswing, even if it's just a couple degrees, but that sequencing makes a huge difference of starting with that tiny, tiny bit of openness in your hips. Again, you won't even really see it on camera, it's so subtle. Now, and partly in doing that, there's an ancillary benefit that's gonna add power to your swing. So, as I add this tiny bit of hip rotation, my rib cage is gonna rotate slightly. See how I'm just moving my hip and my upper body's moving just, again, it's so subtle. And these are the things, again, that I've spent this whole past week, you know, I'm working on my sitting into the left side and transition moves, but I've really been spending as much time, if not more than anything, on just these little setup details, because the nuances are what really separate the really high handicap golfer from the great golfer. It's just these little tiny things. So as I add this little tiny bit of rotation, this moves my upper body, again, very slightly, but and again, from down the line, once I'm set up, you can't tell. My shoulders still look dead square to you. Even though my upper body, my rib cage, has rotated ever so slightly. What does that really do for me? It puts that right arm more connected to my rib cage and engages that lat, that rhomboid, and pulls everything back in. You've heard me over a decade ago, I published the idea of how the takeaway can be done a million different ways. You guys have seen that video, it's still up on YouTube from 2009, and how I'm talking about you don't try to position the club, you just do this 2-inch shoulder blade glide. I was the first one to publish that information, and by doing that, learning how to move that shoulder blade, it moves the club for you. You don't have to try and position the club in the takeaway. It will happen perfectly by you just moving 2 inches. I didn't try to move the club at all. I literally just focused on my shoulder blade. By doing this little setup tweak, it moves that shoulder blade more into connection with my body. The tendency is for golfers, there's a video on the site, the right hand dominance setup, where you get kind of like this, and you don't realize how right side dominant you are, and you get a weak right hand grip, and you get disconnected from your core by protracting the shoulder blade. And so now you're in this setup to where it's very easy to just be all arms, and that's what most amateur golfers end up doing. The pros are gonna set up more connected to the big muscles, and by doing this tiny little bit of turn, it takes my shoulder from being protracted and pulls it back, and now I feel connected. So as I move that shoulder blade to get my swing to the top, by the time I get to the top, this right shoulder blade is really loaded up. The blade is moved up against the spine, and now as I rotate my body, it forces my arm to accelerate as I accelerate my body. By making this little tiny setup tweak, the left shoulder is going to protract a little bit, and then the right shoulder blade is going to retract slightly. So I almost feel, I'm going to exaggerate this. Again, this is such a subtle thing, but these subtle differences make a huge difference in your swing. Here's what it would look like being really exaggerated. I'm going to turn my hips and my shoulders, and now I'm really like this. Now that's not what we're doing, but it may kind of feel like that to you at first if you're one of these people who's used to kind of setting up, you know, in a really weak posture. But again, it's just a tiny, tiny bit of a little bit of hip rotation that rotates my rib cage, connects me to back to my core, so that as I go to the top and get ready to do that throw the ball drill to add that speed into the swing, I'm automatically connected right from setup. So I hope this helps you out. These are the big things that I've been working on, well, little things really, but have a huge impact on your swing. And so hopefully I'll see you again soon as I keep adding more stuff to my drill. So far, like I said, I'm just making these little tiny setup changes, so as I go to the top, I feel nice and loaded up. As I come down, the club's right down in a good position for me, and I'm pretty excited. I'm getting ready to do the roadshow stuff coming up soon. I'm gonna make more announcements about that soon, but hopefully this helps you and gives you something else to focus on in your practice.